Okay, tonight we're reading Thumbelina. There was once a woman.
Walnut shell.
There was once a woman who for many years longed to have a child, but none came. At last she went to visit a good fairy and begged her to help. "Here is a barley corn," the fairy said. "Plant it in a flower pot and water it well. Then see what happens." The woman did as she was told. Soon a large and very beautiful flower came up. It looked something like a tulip, but its petals were closed as though it were still a bud. "How lovely it is," the woman said, kissing it. As she did so, the red and gold petals opened. Inside was a pretty little maiden, only half as tall as the woman's thumb. The woman and her husband were overjoyed and named the child Thumbelina. The child's cradle was a polished walnut shell with a violet petal for a pillow and a rose petal for a coverlet.
I knew it.
Here she slept each night. During the day she played on the table where the woman had placed a plate full of water, using a tulip petal as a boat and 2 white horsehairs as oars. Thumbelina rowed herself around and around the tiny lake. As she rowed, she sang to herself in the loveliest little voice imaginable. One night, as Thumbelina lay in her tiny bed, a great ugly toad crept through the open window. "What a pretty little maiden," the toad croaked when he saw Thumbelina. "She'd make a fine wife for my son." Picking up the little walnut cradle, she carried Thumbelina away to her home in the marsh. The toad's son was even bigger and uglier than his mother. When he saw the little maiden, he croaked with delight. "Shh! You'll wake her," his mother scolded. "We'd better put her on a lily pad in the middle of the stream. That way she won't be able to run away." So the old toad swam out to the largest lily pad, and on it she placed the little walnut cradle with Thumbelina inside. The next morning, when Thumbelina woke, she found herself on the great lily pad and water all around. She began to cry. She could not see any way of getting back to dry land. Soon, the 2 big ugly toads came swimming up to the lily pad. "Here is my son," the mother toad croaked. "He is to be your husband. I am preparing a lovely home for you down in the mud." "Croak, croak," was all the son could say. After they left, Thumbelina began to weep bitterly. She didn't want to marry the ugly toad and live with him in the muddy marsh. Some little fish swimming in the stream heard her sobbing. They lifted their heads out of the water to look at her. When they saw how sad Thumbelina was, they felt sorry for her. "A pretty maiden like that marry an ugly toad," they cried. "It cannot be." So they gathered under the lily pad and began gnawing at the stalk. At last the stem broke and Thumbelina floated away downstream. She sailed past forests, green pastures, and big bustling towns. The birds in the bushes looked down at her and sang, "How pretty the maiden is." The beetle, who was flying overhead, spotted Thumbelina as she floated down the stream. He swooped down and seized her in his claws and carried her to his nest high in a tree. He put Thumbelina down on a leaf at the top of the tree, and he settled beside her. He told her she was very pretty, though she didn't look at all like a beetle, and he said he would like to make her his wife. Presently the other beetles came over to meet Thumbelina, but when they saw her, they turned up their feelers in horror. "How strange and ugly she is," they cried. "Why, she has only 2 legs and no feelers at all. Why, she looks like a human being." When he heard what the others said, the beetle who had brought Thumbelina there wanted nothing more to do with her. He flew her down from the tree and set her on a daisy. "Here, Thumbelina began to cry because she thought she was too ugly for even a beetle to want, though of course she was prettier than the prettiest rose. Boy, this story is all about looks, huh? It's not really about whether they're good people. That's too bad. The whole summer, Thumbelina lived all alone in the forest. She wove herself a bed of grass, then hung it under a big leaf to keep off the rain. She ate the nectar from the flowers and drank the dew from the leaves. Autumn came and went, and before long it was winter. The birds who had sung to her all summer flew.
When she sings, she's a good person if she's really pretty. Exactly.
The birds flew away, the leaves fell from the trees, and all the flowers wilted and died. Thumbelina no longer had a protected place to hang her bed. Then it began to snow. Poor Thumbelina almost froze to death. She was so small, and compared to her, the snowflakes were so big that they nearly buried her. She wrapped herself in a dry leaf to keep warm, but still she shivered. At last she went off through the woods. Soon she came to a large cornfield and the home of a field mouse under the corn roots. The field mouse lived in warmth and comfort. A fire heated the kitchen, and the storerooms were stocked with corn. Shivering, Thumbelina knocked on the door and begged for something to eat. "Oh, you poor thing," cried the field mouse when she saw the pretty little maiden. "Come in and have some supper with me." After they had eaten, the field mouse said, "If you will cook and clean for me and tell me nice stories, you may stay with me for as long as you like." Thumbelina happily agreed, and soon she was living in great comfort. "We are going to have a visitor," the field mouse said one day. "He is much wealthier than I am, and he wears a beautiful black waistcoat. Oh, he would make you a fine husband, Thumbelina. But he is blind, so you must be sure to tell him one of your most amusing stories." The visitor came. He certainly was rich, and there could be no doubt that he knew many things, but Thumbelina was not very interested in him because he was a mole. However, he made fun of the flowers and the sun, which he had never seen. Still, to please the field mouse, she told him her best stories and sang for him in her sweet, clear voice. The mole soon fell in love with her, though he didn't say anything, for he was a very cautious gentleman. Now the mole had recently dug a long tunnel between his house and the field mouse's. One day he invited the field mouse and Thumbelina to pay him a visit and offered to guide them through the tunnel himself. "But you must not be alarmed by the dead bird that lies in the passage," he told them. So they set out. When they came to where the dead bird lay, the mole pushed his nose up through the ceiling of the tunnel by accident. The earth caved in, letting the sun shine through. In the light, Thumbelina could clearly see the dead bird. It was a swallow. He didn't look as if he'd been dead long. His wings were pulled close to his sides, and his head was tucked under his feathers. Poor bird, Thumbelina thought. He must have died of the cold. She thought of all the birds who had sung to her so beautifully all summer and felt very sad. The mole pushed the swallow aside. "He certainly won't sing again," he said. "Thank goodness my children won't be birds. What's the good of singing all summer if you only die of cold when winter comes?" "That is very true," agreed the field mouse politely. Thumbelina said nothing, but when the other two turned their backs, she quickly bent over and kissed the swallow. "Farewell, dear pretty bird," she whispered. "Perhaps it was you who sang so prettily to me all summer long." That night, however, Thumbelina could not sleep. At last she got out of bed and wove a thick blanket of hay. This she carried to the dead swallow and carefully covered him with it. "Farewell, pretty bird," she whispered, laying her head on the bird's chest. She was startled. She heard a loud thumping noise. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, but only in a faint from the cold. Thumbelina couldn't help feeling frightened because the swallow was much larger than she. But she bravely wrapped the blanket tightly around him and tiptoed away. The next night, Thumbelina again visited the swallow. He was alive, but very weak. "Thank you for saving me," he whispered. "Perhaps I can fly out into the sunshine." "Oh no," Thumbelina replied. "It's still very cold. Keep still, and I will take care of you until spring comes." So, for the rest of the winter, she tenderly nursed the swallow. At last, spring came, and the swallow was well enough to fly. Thumbelina opened the hole the mole had made, and the warm sunlight came shining through. It looked so beautiful that the swallow begged Thumbelina to come away with him. She could sit on his back, he said. He would fly with her into the green woods. But Thumbelina said no. She did not want to hurt the field mouse's feelings by leaving her that way. "Goodbye then, my little friend," the swallow said, spreading his wings and soaring into the blue sky. Thumbelina watched him go. Tears came into her eyes. How she longed to follow him into the bright sunlight, but she could not. The corn sprouted, and all summer it grew high and strong until it was like a thick wood to Thumbelina. "Come," the field mouse told her. "We must prepare your wedding dress, Thumbelina. The mole has asked for your hand in marriage." Now Thumbelina had to sit spinning day and night. The field mouse hired 4 spiders to help her so that the dress would be finished in time. Every evening the mole came to call. He made Thumbelina sing "Bye Bye Ladybird" and other songs for him. He told her they would get married as soon as summer was over. Thumbelina was most upset, for she did not wish to marry the mole at all. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening as it set, she tiptoed to the field mouse's door and gazed out at the warm sun and the bright blue sky. Then she would sigh. She longed to see her friend, the swallow, just one more time. At last, as the autumn wind blew across the corn, Thumbelina's wedding dress was finished. "You will be married the day after tomorrow," the field mouse happily told her. Thumbelina burst into tears. "I don't want to marry the mole," she cried. "Don't be silly, or I'll bite you with my sharp teeth," the field mouse said curtly. "He is very handsome and rich as well. You should be grateful to have such a suitor." Thumbelina felt very sad. She knew that after she married the mole, she would never again see the sun and the flowers or hear the birds sing. Drying her tears, she went outside one last time. "Farewell, beautiful sun," she whispered. "Farewell." She hugged a small red flower growing just beside the door. "Say hello to the swallow for me if you ever see him again." "Tweet, tweet," came the swallow, who was just overhead and had come especially to see her. Thumbelina was overjoyed to see her friend, and she told him how she was to marry the mole and live underground where the sun never shone. "Come with me instead," the swallow replied. "I am flying south for the winter. You may sit on my back and tie yourself to my feathers with your sash. We will leave behind forever the gloomy mole and his dark passage. I will take you to warm places where the sun shines even more brightly than it does here, and the flowers are always in bloom." Sounds like Costa Rica. "Please come. I have never forgotten how you saved my life when I lay frozen in that dark tunnel." "Yes, I will come," Thumbelina said. She climbed on the swallow's back, tied her scarf around one of his feathers, and together they soared high in the air.
Daddy, I forgot to remind you to hire the bike seat.
Yeah, we'll do it in the morning then. Yes, I will come, Thumbelina said. Oh.
Too small for me coming.
The swallow flew with her over great forests, shining seas, and high mountains blanketed by snow. They passed through warm, pleasant lands where purple and green grapes grew, and the air smelled of oranges and lemons. At last they came to a clear blue lake. Beside it, surrounded by tall green trees, stood a palace of gleaming white marble. On the roof were many swallows' nests, and Thumbelina could hear all the birds singing. "This is my home," said the swallow, "but you would not be happy in a rooftop nest. Instead, I will place you in one of those flowers below." On the ground lay a large white marble column broken in 3 pieces, and among the pieces there grew the most lovely white flowers. The swallow placed Thumbelina on the largest of them, and what a surprise she had when she looked around. She could hardly believe her eyes. A tiny little man, as transparent means that you can kind of see through him, as if he were made of crystal, so you can see through him perfectly, stood in the middle of the flower. On his head he wore a tiny gold crown, and 2 delicate little wings grew from his shoulders. He was the fairy of the flower, for in every flower lives either a tiny man or woman fairy, and this little man was king of all the flower fairies. When he saw Thumbelina, he thought she was by far the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. I'm sure he means smart, intelligent, witty, kind, nice. But they really, your mom is witty. It means she's funny and she's smart and she speaks well. Alright, so, where were we? Flower fairies. When he saw Thumbelina, he thought she was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. He asked her name, and then he asked if she would be his wife.
She thinks she's a really good person because she's so beautiful.
Yeah, which really, just being beautiful doesn't make you a good person, right?
No.
So.
And you could rob and be the beautiful person.
That's true.
In the world.
That's true. He was nothing like the ugly toad, the beetle, or the mole, and so Thumbelina delightedly said yes. He asked her name, and then he asked if she would be his wife. Okay. All the flowers happily opened, and each flower fairy brought Thumbelina a gift, the best of which was a pair of tiny gossamer wings. These the flower fairies fastened to Thumbelina's shoulders so she, too, could flit from flower to flower just as they did. That spring the wedding of Thumbelina and the Fairy King was celebrated with great joy. The swallows sang a wedding song, the most beautiful song you can imagine. It was both a happy and sad song, for the swallow was bidding farewell to his dear friend Thumbelina. It was time to return to his northern home. "Farewell, farewell," he cried as he took flight. Now every spring the swallow sings of Thumbelina, and that is how we came to hear her story. The end.
I'm having growing pains.
Growing pains? Please stop growing. I like my little Babaloo. My 9-year-old Babaloo. No more growing.
Pains?
At night or all day? Just at night.
Night.
Yeah, that's when I used to get them.
Yeah.
When I was your age. You're getting them too, Pop?
Actually, I got a ton.
A ton of growing pains. That's why you're stretched out the way you are. You were just my little puppy, and now you're losing teeth, and you're so tall.
No.